minutes from the dangerous dogs ordinance. Is that correct, Angela? Okay. Okay, all those in favor, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Thank you. Third thing on the agenda is the merchant's private license. This was discussed, it looks like, okay, it was discussed in one of the council meetings, and then on 6/14, it looks like, and then it was referred to the Public Health and Safety Committee. I'm gonna call on Mr. Luther. Can you tell us what this is, what we're trying to do here, what we're trying to change, and kind of just give us an overall of this, if you would, please?
Sure. What this would do is, this is the sections of our ordinance that deal with licensing of merchant cards. There's a whole set of ordinances that go together here for merchant card licensing. And what the amendment would do is, the first thing it would do is it would take out any reference to firearms regulations. A couple of years ago, the state statute was changed where cities are no longer able to regulate carrying or possession of firearms. And so in the past, that used to be one of the things that we would regulate, was a merchant guard that was going to be armed. We would require training, and they'd have to tell us what kind of gun they were carrying and those sorts of things. With the passage of that state statute, this amendment would remove any of those regulations and simply leave that up to the employer on whether they want to employ an armed guard or not. Another thing it does is it amends the definition of what is a conviction. Currently, for purposes of licensing, we ask on our application if somebody's ever been convicted of a crime. Conviction is defined to include not only a court finding of guilt, but also convictions that resulted in, or cases that resulted in a diversion or deferred adjudication or a juvenile case. It also includes cases that have been expunged after the person has already satisfied the sentence. We ask all of those things on our application. What the amendment would do is change the definition to no longer consider expungements, diversions, and juvenile adjudications. It would take those out, and we would simply be looking at people that are convicted as a result of a finding of guilt by a court. One other thing it does, it makes a fairly substantial change to the requirements for the license that we look at. It rewords some of those, it changes the timelines on those. For felonies, what we were looking at was, we asked if they've been convicted of a felony within 20 years, and that would go back to, we would just ask if they've ever been convicted of a felony. The reason for that is because it's tied to the expungement statute. There's different timelines on when people become eligible for an expungement based on the kind of crime they've committed. Some crimes are never eligible for expungement. So the way we would address that in this ordinance is simply say, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And then we would apply the appropriate timeline during the application review. For misdemeanors, it would set the timeline at 10 years, and it would simplify the language in what kind of misdemeanors we're talking about. Crimes involving dishonesty or fraud, use of a firearm, crime of violence, or crime of involving a controlled substance. I reason for that is because the way our ordinance is written right now, we ask about Class A or B misdemeanors. And we also have another section that asks about theft, then asks about controlled substances. What this really does is it shortens the timeline to 10 years, and it cleans up the language on what exactly is it that we're asking about. It's not all misdemeanors. Somebody that's convicted of a trespass or disorderly conduct, or maybe a drug paraphernalia case, well, that would be a controlled substance. That's a bad example, but not all misdemeanors are ones we need to be concerned about. And it clarifies the language on which of those misdemeanors are a concern. That's the short version of what this would do.
Okay. Sure.
Counselor, is there a situation where somebody had recently, made a bad decision as a youth, and now they're trying to apply for a license, and we're trying to maybe adjust some of the language for people that did make a bad decision when they were younger?
Yeah, one of the reasons what's prompted this is the department. Yeah. The department does about, I think in 2015, they issued, or had 364 merchant guard applications.
Mm-hmm.
Of those, 7 applications were ones that were affected by the expungement or diversion language and resulted in a denial. It was 7 applications out of 364. Of those 7, there were a couple that were appealed to the city council according to the code. We had that right for an appeal. And those situations were reviewed. The applicants came to the city council meeting, presented their situation, and sometimes they're pretty compelling situations. They may have been minor offenses or very dated offenses that happened a long time ago, but the way our ordinance is written, we had to deny the license.
Mhm.
So the change to the ordinance that we're talking about is relaxing some of those restrictions, so it's not such a hardship in cases like that.
I remember that young man who was still, we still had to deny him. Will he then qualify? I think he pretty much had his life turned around since the
I don't
youthful
remember his
indiscretion.
exact situation, but I believe he would qualify under what we're proposing.
Are you talking about the gentleman that was hitting the police officer and he wasn't on meds, but now he's on meds and seems to be doing pretty good?
I
And
can't remember which
I think
one
that
it was.
was
He was
Mhm. He's having a hard time trying to get employment. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my question is always, what are you both recommending, legal and the police department? This is something that you see we need to do, and it would help in certain cases, that if it was a youth violation and now they're, many years later as an adult, it would change that. Is that kind of why we're dealing with this, that it would help to have a merchant guard license approved? That might be good to approve, and because the incident happened as a youth, that, they've changed that around. I guess I always try to figure out why we're doing this. So if this is to help in our situation with licensing guards and allow it to be more flexible so that we, would still have that option based on, the differences in the ordinance that we would have compared to what we have now. So that's my question.
I think I can respond to that.
Okay, Mary?
Council directed staff, I think you were a little bit upset because of the harsh results that this imposes on people who committed minor offenses years ago and kids. So you directed staff to do that. And this is what we've come back
Okay.
to you with. So a conviction would truly just be a conviction. It wouldn't include expungements, diversions, juvenile adjudications. However, Councilmember Emerson raised the issue, should we be in the licensing business at all? So we did a little research, and some cities license security guards, some don't. Lenexa, Overland Park, Olathe, Lawrence, they don't license security guards. They leave that to the business to do. So you do have that option if you want to get out of the licensing business altogether. If you want to retain licensure, we could make the changes that are being recommended. And Topeka is the only city in Kansas that defines conviction very, very broadly to include expungements and diversions and juvenile adjudication. So you'd be consistent with what other cities in Kansas are doing. But those are the two issues that you all have to decide, I think. You want to get out of the business, or do you want to loosen up some of the restrictions that have produced such harsh results?
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Do we charge for these applications currently? And about what does that run?
Yes. Let's see. Yes, there's a $30 license fee and then a $47 KBI background check fee.
This
Well,
is a copy of the current application for a security guard.
Well, if I may follow up then with that whole discussion of, what we're doing here would make us consistent with other cities in Kansas, but we still have the question of whether or not we really want to be in the licensing business. So that question leads to the cost of staff to do the licensing. Would it be something that we would free up more time with the police department, or the licensing requiring that to be done? And I would hope that at least our licensing fee is covering the cost of staff to have to do all this, especially if other cities don't do it. So,
Well, we did, Brian Desch did come up with those statistics and essentially made assessments based upon the costs involved, but I think the fee is not covering the TPD's costs.
okay.
Can you break that down, Mary? Do you have those figures?
I've got, is it Colonel Desch?
Yes.
Okay, Colonel Desch's information, and I don't know, Russ, you might, if you want to go through it in more specifics.
Right, the information that I have from the colonel is the salary and benefits. We have one clerk that handles this. That's their job every day, is to come in and handle the licensing. And that's an office assistant too, is their title. And they spend about 70% of their time with that task, and then 30% on other tasks as needed. But they do a lot of work back there. The salary and benefits for the 70% is right around $29,744, give or take. And let's see.
Well, the total cost to the city is about $32,744, and we only bring in about $10,000.
So
yeah.
about a third of what we expend, we're getting back.
Do we know why we started this, or why we do it? I mean, I was told, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that we have access to things that they don't have access, and that's why they have us do it, the background checks and KPI.
Oh, well, I can tell you that we field our background checks out to the KBI in this regard. That's part of the fee, is the $47 for the KBI background check. And so, is there a need for this to be in our agency? Is that the question?
I guess.
Or- Well, for lack of a better place to put it, it is fairly strategic in the fact that that clerk is located in our records division. It's easy for us in that regard to make those connections to local background checks, local crimes, police reports, those kinds of things. So strategically, it's a good place as any for them. And I do feel that having a person dedicated to this task, if we're going to remain in the licensure business, that's the way to go, because you have one
No,
person.
I agree with that. I just wonder, I mean, it's just a concern, like, especially since you said other cities don't do it. Then who does it for them, I wonder?
I would assume it's a
Business.
security business. I mean, they've got liability issues if they put somebody in a home who's
Right.
got convictions.
Right.
So
Right.
it's in their best interest
Right.
to check these people out.
The employer.
So, now whether they do so independent from us, I don't know. I would imagine
I
they
don't.
would just let us.
I don't think
do it.
so,
The
yeah.
information, I think they rely solely on us.
Okay. So what we're seeing is a lot of denial because, and correct me if I'm wrong, is because of their past, of expungements, things that they haven't been convicted of, correct?
I wouldn't say it's a lot. We have a small number of our applicants are denied, and those denials are based on things that happened many years ago that they would be eligible for an expungement, or that they had a diversion for. Those are the ones that typically be the hard ones. the hard
But
cases.
a lot of times they say, I forgot about it, or I thought it was an expungement, or, something, or a diversion. How do they not know?
Well, I think it's a common misunderstanding. People think when they get a diversion that it doesn't count, or when they have something expunged that it's taken off of their record. And I think people don't understand that why they're being asked about those things. If they're not supposed to count, then why do I have to put it down on my application? I think there's been some confusion over that.
Okay, yes.
Do you think changing the language would affect public safety at all? Maybe a question for the police department, maybe?
I'll answer that to say that we don't have any indication that these, few applicants who are denied because of these things would have a negative impact on public safety. Were they allowed to apply? They still need to meet the obligations of their employer and, the policies and procedures set in place by the company also. So, and for something to be a significant crime, it's probably not likely to be expunged or given diversion anyway. So the crimes that we're looking at that are falling into this category aren't likely to be the ones that are going to be a threat to society.
Well, if I may, I think you've really shed some light on a lot of information, even more than what we had when we heard about all this at the beginning. And the fact that Lenexa, Overland Park, Olathe, and Lawrence have gotten out of the business of licensing is even more remarkable to me. And then Salina, Manhattan, Wichita, and Kansas City are the only ones that are still doing licensing. So I guess I've always been one of those that would go for less regulation than more regulation. And so I'm kind of torn now whether or not that we even need to be in the licensing business. If we have cities in Kansas that I admire that don't have it, do we know if any of those cities had a influx of more criminal activity after they got out of the licensing business? I mean, if we're only in this because the businesses want us to be doing the background checks and all of this, to me, that doesn't really make sense.
Well, it's cheaper, probably cheaper for them.
Well, yeah. But to me, I guess if we need to really look, I mean, I would vote to pass this out to make it that we're consistent with the other 4 that are still doing in the licensing business, and then study the issue more to see if we do want to be in the licensing business. Because it sounds to me like other cities are taking the lead to get out of the licensing business.
It would be helpful to have the security companies come here and share their thoughts on this. I mean, they're stakeholders.
Right.
So I would want to hear from them. I don't know what
Right.
their feelings would be.
Should we invite them to the next?
We could. The thing of it is, I mean, if I knew this was on the agenda, I'd probably be here now. I mean, I don't know how much interest they would have, but we can.
But as Ms. Fee pointed out, they do share a significant portion of the burden for those, inappropriate people who gain licensure and do, these things. Also, I believe built into the ordinance is a requirement that violations that occur while licensed have to be reported, and they have to come forward with that information as well within a short number of days. So there is that element in there that forces them to keep us apprised. But again, each company has a certain amount of onus over their employees. And they, I would expect, would have a policy on that kind of thing as well, because, it's going to come on to them should anything happen.
It's up to the body.
Are you moving to?
Yeah, I think we should at least move to adopt the ordinance and
Adopt the ordinance as amended?
yeah, the
Okay.
proposal, and then pass that out, and at the discussion, whether or not I think this is a question that the full body needs to be involved in if we're gonna get out of the licensing business.
Yes, I'll second that.
Or do we have any more questions on the corrections or amendments? Are there any more? Do
I
you
don't have any.
Do you? Mary, did you have something you guys wanted to say, or,
No.
okay?
No,
Russell?
thank you.
Okay, Luther? Did you guys have something you wanted to add?
Just as I was reviewing this, prior to the committee meeting, Councilmember Giller had sent some questions and concerns that she had. One of those was towards the end about crime of violence. What I mentioned about the misdemeanors being defined as certain categories, one of those is a crime of violence. It might be helpful if we consider adding a definition to define what crime of violence is, because when that term was included in the ordinance, what we were thinking about was crime of violence is it's almost like a term of art within criminal law. It means a very certain thing, and there's actually a definition out there of what that means, and it includes not only acts, threats of acts, attempted acts, and I think that would address a lot of her concerns that she had, that it's not only a physically violent act, but it's also a threat or an attempt at an act as well. But we can include a definition of what crime of violence is, and that would make it plainer.
And I would consider that a friendly amendment to the amendment to pass it out, that we have legal add that definition to the proposed ordinance change.
Okay.
If my
Yes.
second would,
Yep.
okay,
Would that have to be a friendly amendment to this, or,
to the motion,
to the motion?
yeah.
To motion to
Pass it
approve
out.
the ordinance as presented with the amendment to
Amendment.
define. a
And what
crime
was
of
the amendment
violence.
again?
Staff would
define?
Define what a crime of
And the
violence
violence.
As
is.
either an act, an attempted act, or a threatened act. So it includes other things like words and actions and restraining orders and those kind of things that are not necessarily a physical act directed at somebody, but a threat as well.
So
Okay.
that's a friendly amendment to the motion, and
Yes.
second has a,
Okay.
agrees.
Is that all? Did you have anything
So
else?
that was all.
Okay.
Okay, all those in favor, raise your right hand. Are there no more questions? Okay, all those in favor to approve it with the amendment? It's 3-0. Angela. The merchant, where did this come from? Does this come from legal, you guys?
Yes, we prepared that just to give you a sense of what other cities do.
Okay.
And what disqualifiers they use.
Okay. This would be helpful when this goes back to the council with
Okay.
this information
All right,
as well.
we'll provide that.
Okay, that would be helpful. Okay. Anything else? Anything else? No? Anything else? No? No? This concludes our meeting. Thank you.
Jeff needs to sign that.
Yeah, we just.